Okay, I think we're good to get started. So thank you for joining us at this evening's Virtual Public Information Center. My name is Alexandria Ticky. I'm a planner at the Niagara region, and I will be hosting the session this evening. We're going to start off with some opening remarks from Dave Hayworth, who is the project manager for the new official plan.
Thank you, Alex. Good evening and welcome, everyone. As Alex mentioned, my name is Dave Hayworth, and my job is to prepare the official plan for adoption by Regional Council. This is our third of 6 virtual sessions to gather public input on major topic areas of the official plan. Tonight's session focuses on topic areas relative to growth management. Your input provided during these sessions is an important consideration for staff in the finalization of background work and development of policy. To view the topic areas of the other PICs and to register, go to www.niagararegion.ca. And I'll pass it over to Alex. Thank you.
Thank you. So to start us off this evening, I would like to introduce you to our panelists, which are made up of regional staff. So beginning with Chris Miller, who is a senior planner for the Long Range Planning Division. We're also joined by Greg Bowie, a planner for the Long Range Planning Division. Isaiah Bannock is joining us remotely. He's a manager of Long Range Planning. And as introduced, Dave Hayworth, who is the project manager for the new official plan. So before we get started, I would like to take a couple of minutes to explain how today's PIC will be run. We'll begin with a presentation that will explain the role and structure of the new official plan and provide an overview of key policy direction that will inform the region's land needs assessment, the regional structure, housing, and the settlement area boundary review. We expect that this presentation will take about 30 to 35 minutes. Following the presentation, the panelists will be available to answer questions. The session for tonight is planned to end at 8 p.m. If you are joining us via Zoom, you can submit your question by either selecting the Q&A or the raise hand feature found at the bottom of your screen. If you select the Q&A function, it will allow you to submit a written comment or question. We will read these questions aloud so that the panelists can provide a verbal response. If you select the raise hand function, it will indicate that you would like to ask your question verbally. We will unmute your microphone and ask you to state your name before proceeding with your question. We ask that you try to limit your questions to 30 seconds or less to ensure we can hear from as many attendees as possible. Along these lines, if you have a follow-up question, please let us know and we will answer it. However, we would like to limit the amount of follow-up questions to 1 per attendee. Please also remember to select lower hand after your question has been heard. If you are joining us via teleconference and have a comment or question, please select *9 to raise your hand. And when prompted, select *6 to unmute your microphone. We will do our best to address as many of the questions as we can this evening, but we may not be able to answer each individual question in detail. If we don't get to your question live, all of the unanswered questions will be answered in writing and posted on the website for the new official plan. If you have additional questions, please contact us by phone or email. And we understand that there may be significant desire to ask questions and provide feedback on this topic. So we request that you avoid duplicating questions that have already been asked. This will ensure that we can get through as many different questions as possible tonight. In addition, please be advised that we are recording the session and are planning to post it to the website in the next several days. It will be posted alongside a copy of the presentation slides. We'd like to ask for your patience and understanding as we navigate this consultation format. While online platforms don't allow for quite the same face-to-face interaction, we greatly value your feedback and questions and will make every effort to ensure your voice is heard. Finally, today's session is being conducted via Zoom, which is a third-party video conferencing platform. If you have questions about using the software, we will do our best to answer them. However, we cannot troubleshoot individual technical problems. If you're having challenges, please contact us following this meeting so that we may respond to any questions or comments you have. Now I'd like to turn it over to Chris and Greg, who will be leading us through the remainder of the presentation this evening. So Chris.
Well, thank you very much, Alex, and welcome to everybody joining us this evening. I'm going to start here with this first slide, and this slide here illustrates the policy framework that Niagara's official plan falls into. I refer to this often as a cascade, and starting at the top, being the province, and with each step down, becoming more and more localized and refined to the geography that it's intending to serve. However, each step down must conform with where it's come from on the step up. So as you can see on the slide, the top end, we have our legislation, the Planning Act, we have the provincial policy statement, and out of the policy statement flow the provincial plans that are in place for Niagara, being the Niagara Escarpment Plan, the Growth Plan, and of course the Greenbelt Plan. And then from that, you'll see the yellow here as being our Niagara official plan. And of course, we need to conform to the left. And down or to the right, of course, will be the local municipalities, so that after our plan is in place, the local municipalities will need to conform with the plan itself, Niagara's plan. So the next slide, what is an official plan? Well, it's a long-range document that shapes our physical and economic and social development of the cities, towns, and the region itself. Niagara region, or the Niagara official plan, currently is being developed and will be completed by the end of 2021, which I believe the conformity date. And so effectively, it's a roadmap of constant reference that is to take us out to the 2051 target. I know this document requires, once regional council adopts this document, it requires provincial approval. And like all policy documents, it's a living document and it's subject to some periodic review, amendments for tweaks along the way. But it does serve as a benchmark, for ongoing reference. So on the next slide here, what we see is, the components of the Niagara official plan. There's generally 5 components, and they've been themed out into specific topic areas. We have a growing region, our connected region, the competitive region, vibrant region, and sustainable region. Tonight, of course, we're talking about the growing region. And each of the 5 components have subsets, let's call them, of topics themselves, and they're in the call-outs that you see on this slide. They're not necessarily always just standalone in those particular areas. All of these subsets relate one way or another, are often found in the same conversations. Now, for example, the growing region we've talked about, most people would think about population, but as you know, the province is giving us population and employment. And but the employment portion of this is best couched underneath the competitive region. So you can see how things would relate. They're certainly go together. So tonight's, of course, is focused on the growing region. So on the next slide here, I just wanted to take a minute to sort of illustrate the role of the region planning and local planning. And it's important for anyone here joining us tonight that to maintain or gain an understanding that the planning role for each level of government in our 2-tier system. And so the columns here that you see on the left and right side, the regional planning, we decide how much growth is going to be allocated to the local municipalities. We guide where people and jobs will and will not go. We'll monitor and maintain information throughout the course of the plan life so that we can have a comprehensive review of that information to see how conformity is stacking up. The locals are doing their thing locally. We need somebody to maintain all of that in one repository or whatever you would like to call it. But we certainly offer support to the local planning partners. And at the local level, this is where decisions are made about individual parcels, the land use, the permitted uses on those parcels, the sets of rules that'll guide the form and the scale of that new development. So effectively, the local official plans and the secondary plan levels will have the densities for low, medium, high, and it's also where you're going to have the comprehensive zoning bylaw, where that's the document that's going to regulate heights, setbacks, coverage, landscaping requirements, things of that nature. Those things are in the domain of the local municipalities. And local municipalities will develop neighborhood or secondary plans with a lot of community collaboration. And they also process the applications for things like subdivisions or site plans. So the closest that you're going to get to seeing the built environment on the ground in your communities. So it's basically an interface. It's not certainly a line, but an interface, and we share a lot of back and forth between it, but generally the role is there as described. So if you're joining to wonder what's on the vacant lot next to you or what could be going in on a vacant lot next to you, That's really not the role that we're serving at the region here. That's more found on the local side of things. So, I would encourage you to get involved with the local planning people to find out about something of that nature. I'll just keep moving along. And we talked about the relationship between the region and the local, but now I'd just like to mention, and as was discussed earlier, I suppose, is that we have to, conform with the upper levels of government. And the province has set a minimum growth target, for Niagara, and we must plan for it. It's basically the message here. So, from there it begins, it becomes the region's responsibility to analyze, distribute portions of that overall growth to our 12 local municipalities. And just to sort of give an indication or an illustration here on what that forecast really entails is out to 2051, that really means that we're planning for an additional 214,000 people to call Niagara home, and also accompany and provide for an additional 81,000 jobs. So if you see the little person's graphic here, the census of 2016 will have pegged Niagara's population at 460,000, and the 2051 population projection of 674,000. So you can see there that, today you're one of a group of 5 friends, and 30 years from now, you'll be a group of almost 7 friends. So that's a sort of simplistic view of that, but that represents, what we're talking about in terms of population. So this particular slide here, and it's a message that I think needs to get out, is that growth is coming, and you can, faced with that, you can choose to manage it, or you can choose to ignore it. Managing growth, together with our local partners, our local municipalities, will result in the best outcome for the Niagara region, for the Niagara region residents. So you can, proactively manage it. Oh, sorry, I'm just going to back up here for a second. You can proactively manage that, and that can be benefit to the region. We can provide a range of housing types that meet the needs of the residents over the lifetime during their life cycle at different levels of affordability. Now, just these 6 icons, I'm just going to take a quick second to stop on that first one, the age in place opportunity. I just want to expand a bit on that one. When people hear that, and it's been in the lexicon of planning for a while now, but when people hear that, they automatically gravitate to our seniors population, but it's much more than that. It is from the moment that you want to leave the house to live as a young teen or early 20s, whatnot, right through the entire life cycle. So we need places for our youth as well, because you've often heard it as our youth are leaving Niagara for greener pastures somewhere else. That we need to do more in that respect. So we need to provide a housing for that full spectrum. So aging in place is that allows them to lay down their roots, get comfortable, and contribute to our community. So I'm just gonna roll through some of the other the bullets there. So the climate change, we can better mitigate and adapt to the climate change by building compact communities, encouraging sustainable development materials and practices. And the efficient use of the infrastructure, well, that's certainly fundamental. We can make efficient use of the existing infrastructure to its planned capacity, and also make strategic decisions about where the future investments are to be made. Investments in the public amenities, and we can increase or use the increased tax revenues to invest in the soft infrastructure services and other public amenities such as the trails, streetscaping, open spaces, public transit. Protection of the natural and rural systems. We can protect our rural and natural systems by directing growth to appropriate areas to minimize the adverse impacts. And of course, support economic development, which by providing more predictable or consistent policies that encourage future investment within the region. So a slide here for climate change. It's, an approach to addressing climate change would be to improve on the mitigation and adaptation practices. So mitigation, of course, being, the effort to reduce or stabilize the levels of greenhouse gases. And, things such as obviously the automobile, reducing automobile emission through providing alternates or options for active transportation, healthy lifestyles, enhancing the carbon sinks. So, things like enhancing our forest cover and our canopy cover in general, even our urban canopy cover. Is something that we can do to help mitigate. And on the adaptation side, adapting to the change is really about the changes and the impacts that we're experiencing currently. So incorporating low impact design and green infrastructure into new development, building flood defenses. So, for example, more recently with our high lake levels, shore walls to help with erosion. So those are adaptation. These kinds of things and architecture really, crosses both of those columns. A lot can be done with the architectural side and LEED and efficiencies with the building materials and the way we heat and cool our homes. So, I think creating complete communities will help us in mitigating that. And I'm just going to move slides here to, I think creating complete communities basically sums it up, in the title itself. Complete communities refers to the areas where residents can access their daily needs for living, in a walkable distance. So in other words, communities that, have individual access, where an individual can access their home, the place of work, retail, shops, open spaces, public services, range of transportation options, including walking, cycling, and of course the transit offers. So achieving complete communities is a key principle in the growth plan. Also, it's discussed and mentioned extensively there. And of course, it's conformity and, the complete community is a aspirational end to some of the things that we're going to be faced with. So I will just move on here, and I'm going to just mention a bit about the settlement areas and the regional structure. So the settlement areas will accommodate the majority of the forecasted population and employment growth. The regional structure will direct that growth towards specific areas. And what you're looking at here is, you have the municipal boundaries of our 12 municipalities, and the grayed out areas are effectively our settlement areas. Our built up areas and our designated greenfield areas. So that's what you see showing in the gray hatched area. Just going to move along here. And so as part of that directing growth, we have a strategic growth concept in place. It's a little bit hard to see. Oh, sorry, I think I'm going to back up one. I think I may have skipped over top of something. So yes, so the regional structure, its components itself. So it's comprised of the built up areas, designated greenfields, strategic growth areas, which is a new in the growth plan for us to illustrate and define. The hamlet areas, the employment areas, which is also something that will be added to our regional structure through this process. And of course, our agricultural and rural system areas. So the strategic growth areas, as mentioned, are new. And I'm just going to go to the next slide now. It's a map that's, I apologize, a little hard to see at this scale, but there's a number of strategic growth areas identified on this map. There are a few that are required of us to be shown by the province. So those would be the major transit station areas, or the GO stations in Grimsby, Beamsville, St. Catharines, and in Niagara Falls. And of course, the urban growth center in St. Catharines, which is Niagara's only urban growth center. Those are required of us to show, but we also show strategic growth areas of regional significance, of course, being the Brock District Plan and the Glendale District Plan. Those are two areas that are of strategic interest and focus for us. We also have downtown Niagara Falls identified, and at this scale, I'm sorry again, we also have downtown Welland identified as strategic growth areas on this schedule. So that just lets you know that that's what we have identified. They will attract, or expected to be attract, a lot of that growth and intensification. So So I'm just going to move into the secondary and district plans. And I'm not going to talk too much about this because there is a webinar tomorrow, and I would encourage you to, if you want to get into some of that finer detail that relates to the interface area. Certainly secondary plans is something that might be of interest to you, and you can attend tomorrow night. But they will generally have, they're a great planning tool. I've been involved in many of these, and they're a great planning tool to help manage and direct that growth in a more localized setting, to give you a better understanding of how the arrangement of the build form and the densities will or can be, put together in a complete community context. So there's usually a lot of community participation in these types of things. And it does a number of things, and it gives a greater expectation to not only the people who are involved and the people in the neighborhood, but it's a greater expectation or gives some comfort to, say, investment. If there's somebody coming to town looking to build and you have a secondary plan in place, it's a signal to them that, the council and the community have come to, a conclusion on a secondary plan area. It also gives financial institutions a little bit more satisfaction that everybody has approved this of this arrangement as well. So, and things like that will ultimately be implemented with the zoning bylaw to conform with that. And as mentioned, I would encourage you to participate or attend tomorrow evening on that. So they're also often locally led, not always, but for the most part, they're locally led, but there are ones with, of course, regional interest. So I'm just going to move on to the next one, which is an illustration. I'm going to talk a bit about intensification. When people hear, intensification, they immediately will gravitate to the right side of this illustration. So, and the people who might hear about that might be living in the left side of this illustration. But, intensification is not always as it appears on the right side. Intensification can happen in numerous ways and in numerous forms. And intensification can happen at the left side of this illustration. So, this illustration is referred to as the missing middle. It's in the planning lexicon these days, but, the left side can intensify through means of adding a basement apartment, turning a detached home into a duplex. Things of that nature is what I refer to as a soft intensification. And depending on where you are or the municipality or the context you're in, some of the smaller municipalities, they may only sort of require intensification that's takes them to the left of center of this illustration. Or some of the ones that, maybe perhaps St. Catharines might be looking at some of the intensification on towards the right of this center. But it can happen in any form throughout. But that missing middle is also something that's really helped address the housing need. There's obviously a need for more multiple residential dwelling units, and it's an opportunity to put that kind of housing form intensification in areas that it's suited to address, that. So I'll leave it at that. So on that particular slide. And on density, well, density is a measure that is, I'm going to just back up on intensification. That's a measure that's related in like a percentage. So the local municipalities will receive an intensification rate from the region at the end of this process. So, let's say the province right now, the average for Niagara is 50. Intensification rate is 50. So really what that means is that 50 of every 100 new dwelling units has to occur in the built up area. So that's how that is measured. And but that's a regional average. And we're going to, as we have before, practice a non-uniform approach to how we distribute that. So not everybody's going to have 50. Some will have less and some will have more, certainly depending on how much available greenfield is. And I'm just going to jump to the next slide on greenfield, because greenfield density is measured a little bit different. Greenfield is measured in the persons and jobs per hectare context. And the province, with this growth plan, we're looking at 50 persons and jobs per hectare. I think it had bounced around a little bit in the previous plans where it was down to 40 and then it was up to 60. But this particular plan, we're looking at 50. So these illustrations, and they're the blue sort of underlying area or the focus of calculations you sort of see below these. So that illustration on the left, where you have a little cluster of perhaps 5 detached homes there, housing 16 people on 0.348 hectares. That's almost 50 units and jobs per hectare right there. So that, is a minimum. And then you can see as we gravitate to the right side here, 63 people and 169 people on those various illustrations. And that's how greenfield is measured. So, but we're also going to assign density to some of these, there's assigned density to some of these strategic growth areas like, downtown St. Catharines. I'm just going to go to the next slide here. And, this is just going to summarize a recap of what's required in the intensification and the density target. So as I was just mentioning, our minimum for intensification in a regional average is 50 across all of the built up area. So 50 out of 100 units needs to be occurring in that built up area. And for the urban growth center in downtown St. Catharines, the minimum target of 150 people and jobs per hectare. And our designated green fields are minimum target of 50 persons and jobs per hectare. So I think I'm just going to maybe take one more slide here. And it's an illustration that was issued, I believe, by the ministry of the province to sort of give you an indication or a visual street level view of what these various densities would look like. So our greenfield areas, for example, of minimum 50 people and jobs would be in the upper left. That's going to achieve that objective or that goal or target. And say the 150 people and jobs in the upper right side being, for example, downtown St. Catharines' urban growth center's target. That to me really doesn't look unlike St. Paul Street as it is now. And the other of 200 and 400, well, that could be a mix of James Street, King Street. But the overall average, that we need to achieve is in St. Catharines in particular, in the urban growth center, would be 150. So those are illustrations that I hope, help give a visual indication to the intensification and density of growth that we're needing to achieve with this planning handed to us by the province that we need to take to 2051. So I'm going to kind of pause it there. I think I heard the music. I think I'll turn it over to my colleague here, Greg. So.
Yeah, thank you. So in addition to the strategies that Chris has mentioned, the official plan will also provide a set of housing policies that will support complete communities. It'll ensure a sufficient housing stock is available at all times to meet the needs of current and future residents. The official plan is going to establish targets for affordable ownership and rental housing development. It'll identify land use and financial incentive tools, support age in place opportunities, Chris mentioned, and affordable housing development. And the official plan will align with the region's housing and homelessness action plan, which was updated and approved by council in October of 2019. More specific to housing affordability, the housing policies will align with the Ontario Housing Supply Action Plan, which emphasizes the need to increase the overall supply of housing units in the province in order to meet market demand and address housing affordability, which has become an increasing issue within Niagara over the last number of years. In this context, housing affordability is generally defined as low to moderate income households that spend less than 30% of their total income on shelter costs, including their rent, mortgage, property taxes, and utility payments. The policies of the official plan broadly address the needs of the market rent and ownership housing. Although other housing needs may benefit from policy direction of the official plan, such as homelessness services, transitional housing, government-assisted housing, and Niagara regional housing builds, specific needs are addressed through separate programs and strategies. In 2019, the region undertook a housing scenario analysis, the results of which determined that there is a need to diversify Niagara's overall housing stock in order to curb rates of unaffordability in Niagara. As you can see on this graph on the slide, 2016 housing mix is quite different than what is proposed by 2041 to help achieve and address housing affordability by increasing the amount of medium and high density housing units within Niagara region. So growth management is an iterative process. The individual growth management strategies, including housing, employment, and regional structure, are connected and directly inform one another. This works, as I said, in an iterative process. In other words, if a component of one strategy is adjusted, the others will adjust to reflect the change as well, so as to find the best overall strategy for growth within Niagara's land use framework. The natural and rural system studies, including natural environment work program, climate change, agricultural and rural systems, watershed planning, and the archaeological master plan, similarly help shape and inform the distribution and type of development across Niagara's landscape. These strategies all come together to guide the distribution of growth from a regional level to a municipal level, which the regions require to do through the official plan process. So this map shows the preliminary distribution of forecasted population growth across Niagara's 12 municipalities based on the information derived from each of the background strategies to date. Again, growth management is an iterative process. Revisions to the regional structure, housing targets, the delineation of employment areas, watershed planning, and other related strategies all have the ability to impact the distribution of growth. They will all require revision to the preliminary distribution that is shown on this map. Through the official plan process, the region is required to undertake a land needs assessment consistent with the province's land needs assessment methodology. The assessment determines the amount of community area and employment area land required to achieve growth forecasts across each of Niagara's municipalities. The process depicted here is highly generalized, but it demonstrates how the land needs assessment is based on inputs from growth management and natural resource systems strategies, and how they each play a role in informing what the overall land needs is across the Niagara region. Based on the results of the land needs assessment, it may be determined that some municipalities do not have enough community area land or employment area lands designated within their existing settlement area boundaries. In these cases, a settlement area boundary expansion may be required. Settlement area boundary expansions can only comprehensively occur through an official plan review. Again, this process is based on numerous background strategies from the official plan review, including the natural heritage system, the agricultural system, and watershed planning updates, as well as any technical studies that are also required where necessary. The region and local municipalities work collaboratively to assess any requests that we have received for settlement area boundary expansions. Any recommendations for expansions will be based on consultation with local municipal councils, the public, and private stakeholders.
Well, thank you, Greg. So where that leads us today on this slide is a kind of timeline of where we can expect to take some of these growth management strategies over the next couple of months and into the new year. So in summer 2020, we saw some changes to provincial policy, as well as the population and employment forecasts that we need to analyze and account for in our official plan. This lead us to fall 2020. Where we're at right now, which is a concentrated effort of consultation and outreach, not only through these official plan webinars in which we are able to hear some feedback and input from members of the public, but also by reaching out to local municipalities and other key stakeholder groups. It's our intention then to use this feedback and the input that we receive to inform this last leg of growth analysis and background studies into the new year. In winter 2020, 2021, so likely at the beginning of the new year, we'll be going back to council and committee to report on these growth management studies and the final analysis that's needed to start developing the policies and mapping for the official plan. And it's our intent as well to really piece together how this growth management strategy is working with our rural and natural system studies, especially as this is an important component to finalizing that policy and mapping development. So into spring 2021, as we put together those drafts, it's our intention to then conduct another series of consultation and outreach sessions in order to get feedback specific to that policy development and mapping. Meanwhile, in the short term, there are still opportunities for you to engage on different areas and topics of the official plan. We had mentioned it a couple of times during this presentation, but tomorrow evening specifically, there will be a webinar on the employment lands, district and secondary plans and urban design, which is very closely related to the work program that we had discussed tonight. In the next couple of weeks, you can expect to see the remaining topics for the official plan being discussed in separate webinars. And finally, we wanted to bring this to your attention if you have not had the opportunity to fill out the growth management survey. This was released in mid-September. It is going to be closing on October 14th, so next Wednesday. And the intent really is to gain further feedback on the growth management topics that we had discussed today. The links to which are found on this slide, both the graphic-based and text-based survey. And they can also be found on the official plan website proper. And with that, we want to thank you for sticking with us through this presentation. We'll shortly be going into our Q&A session, but if you do have any follow-up questions or comments, please feel free to contact us at any time. So with that, I do believe we have received a couple of questions so far. But before we get into that, I just wanted to issue a reminder to submit a question. You can use the Q&A icon found at the bottom of your screen, and that will allow you to type in your question or use the raise hand feature to indicate that you prefer to ask your question verbally. And again, it may not be possible to answer all questions verbally, but we want to ensure that if there are any questions that are not answered today, we will be answering them in a table format and posting that on the website along with a copy of the presentation. So I'm going to go with some of the text questions that we have. I see that we have a couple raised hands, so we'll go through and do a bit of the Q&A button first. I believe we may have answered this one in the text of the presentation, but I'll go ahead and read this out. So how does the region decide how much growth is allocated to any given municipality? And I think, Greg, you might be the best person to answer this.
Yeah, sure. So the distribution of growth from a regional level to a local municipal level is based on the culmination of numerous studies and strategies. So we assess things such as the vacant land supply that currently exists within a municipality. We look at market demands that have been occurring over the last number of years, as well as forecasted market demands. And then we balance that, of course, against things such as the natural heritage system and take into consideration limitations such as the Greenbelt plan that would limit the opportunity for expansion, et cetera. So hopefully I did mention that throughout the presentation. So that's in general how we distribute that growth. And then through our official plan review, we also analyze just how much capacity each municipality could ultimately receive and grow.
Okay, thank you, Greg. And we have one more question here in the Q&A portion. So the question is, the planning is focusing on established communities. Regions such as Wainfleet have no established communities and based on your definition will be excluded from this planning. West Lincoln also has minimal growth planned. Are these communities going to have the support to maintain their infrastructure needs to allow for projected growth in the designated areas? And again, I think, Greg, maybe if you could speak to this one.
Yeah, of course. So I'll break it down into two parts, the Wainfleet and the West Lincoln specific, but I'll try to be more broad. Through allocating growth to individual municipalities, that information is then shared with our colleagues here within the transportation and waste management, as well as water and sewer services. So any growth that we're projecting would ultimately be accounted for within our future infrastructure needs. So should additional growth be required within Waynfleet or West Lincoln or any other municipality, that would be captured through master servicing strategies as well as the transportation master plan to ensure that infrastructure is there to facilitate that growth and be in alignment with the projections that we have in place. Certainly, Waynfleet is a unique municipality in the sense that there is no urban settlement area, but they do have rural settlement areas. That is a focus of growth still. It's considered to be a settlement area, and should housing be focused within the municipality of Waynfleet, the rural settlement area would be an appropriate place to start. West Lincoln specifically, they're a municipality that has been growing quite strongly over the last number of years. They are the only municipality that went through an urban boundary expansion based on the first conformity exercise the region went through in 2009. That was called Niagara 2031. And through that process, they were given an urban boundary that could accommodate growth to the year 2031. As mentioned through this presentation, we're now dealing with an additional 20 years of housing and population employment allocations to 2051. Therefore, any growth that's going to West Lincoln will have to require quite significant studies and infrastructure improvements to accommodate.
Thank you, Greg. I think we'll move over to our raised hands. We have a couple here. So we will start with John B. I'm going to unmute your mic, John. So please remember, as you were prompted, to unmute it on your end. Hi, John. Can you unmute your mic, please?
Yes, I
Thank you.
believe I have it. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Good, John.
I hear you.
All right. The question I have is that believe next Wednesday there's a meeting on a public meeting under the Planning Act on a urban boundary expansion in Welland of 190 acres. And this seems to be, inappropriate for this to be going ahead in advance of this whole process. It seems to be using an odd loophole. The province has allowed minor urban expansions of, I believe, you may have difficulty remembering the exact, I think it's 40 hectares. But this expansion is going ahead through what's called multiple combinations of several that add up to 190 hectares, which I think is fundamentally a negation of this entire exercise.
Would one of the panelists want to respond to?
Isaiah will respond.
Thank you.
Hi, good evening, everyone. This is Isaiah Bannock speaking, and thank you for your question. It's a good one. The 40-hectare expansion provision is something new in the growth plan. The province has made it explicitly clear that you're allowed to do more than one 40-hectare expansion. So what is being proposed is certainly within the permissions of what can be proposed. The region has not taken a position yet on that expansion request. There is a public meeting, as you noted, and at the appropriate time, we will be advancing the region's position on that expansion. Thanks for the question.
Okay, I think we will move on then to another verbal question. Ashley P., I see that you have raised your hand. I will allow you to talk, and when prompted, please unmute your mic.
Hi, thank you for letting me ask. I've actually kind of got three questions. you keep saying greenfields. Is there a definition of greenfields? And you don't have to answer that in this webinar, but I think answer later on maybe. Like, to me, greenfields is not just those lovely fields that are farmed or those lovely woodlots. It's also things like roof gardens, vertical gardening, more trees on streets, more trees within mall parking, like, in other words, plant a tree next to a lamp standard in mall parking. One, I think it will just do make a tremendous effort towards the getting to that minimum 30% canopy. But when you're talking about your settlement areas, is the green going to happen? Is it possible that within the plan that developers can be charmed into, let's do all kinds of green, because it does make a difference? Second question is, will we, the public, be allowed to give feedback and be engaged after these webinars? And the third question is pollution being seriously addressed? And I recognize that tonight is much more to do with urban and employment. But this is my third attendance, and I'm planning on asking this question at all 6.
Well, we thank you for your participation, Ashley. I think maybe, Chris, do you want to respond to that initial question on designated greenfields, and we can go from there?
Yeah, certainly. Thank you, Ashley, for your questions. Greenfield does have a definition in the growth plan, and that's basically what that really is area that has yet to be planned out with, draft plans of subdivision or things like that extend out to our already planned service, extents. So that's, a general definition of that. But I think really what you're focusing on is a lot to do with urban design. And I totally agree with that, making efforts to green up the development as it's occurring. You've raised a couple of examples that are familiar, but those are things that happen at a very, site level. But they'll happen at a little bit further down as applications come in, or the community planning or secondary planning, which is, an avenue that I would encourage you to get involved with tomorrow, because they'll be together. The secondary plan and the urban design component will be discussed in detail tomorrow. So I would encourage you, if you can, to register for tomorrow's webinar, and that will have all kinds of discussion on that topic. And, hopefully that's enough to respond to that one. And as far as feedback goes, yes, absolutely. Feedback is going to be ongoing, throughout this process. There's no desire to cut it off. We welcome and encourage that. I'm sorry, I've sort of just missed the third portion of that question. Somebody wanted this.
Opportunity for further.
Oh, okay. The third question is pollution being addressed? And I really am a tree person. I'm not going to deny it, because I think trees just do a tremendous amount or help a tremendous amount towards pollution, air pollution, ground pollution, even mitigation for flood areas, stuff like that. So I'm a huge tree person.
Right. Well, thank you. And yes, I mean, certainly the policies for climate change will be evident in the plan as it's advanced, but you're talking more along the lines of the things we were poking at earlier with mitigation and adaptation. Mitigation is the reduction of those greenhouse gases and things like that, which of course, your trees certainly contribute to that. Now, it's things like compact communities or complete communities that we were discussing also. Those are walkable environments. So anything we can do in our planning exercises to make our communities more friendly to getting out. One of the things, during these current times was certainly there was a lot of people walking, riding their bikes, and I'm sure they were enjoying that. So providing infrastructure, things like that, that will encourage continued use, having complete communities where you can get to the services and the things that you need on your daily basis will help, with the reducing the amount of internal combustion that is occurring. And certainly, that's one thing that is often highlighted is the amount of automobile, but there are other things. But as the policies develop, I'm sure that you'll, from the sounds of it, want to be making comments on those policies when they're released. So thank you for the question, Ashley. I appreciate that.
And thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, I think we're going to move over again to our Q&A questions. So the first question I have here, will the reports to council in winter 2020/2021 confirm the amount of land needed for growth and identify the locations where urban expansion is recommended? Greg?
Yeah, so thank you, Martin, for the question. The report is going to council in winter 2020/2021. It'll really depend on what decisions are being made. As we kind of highlighted, the land needs assessment, the exact amount of land needed to accommodate the 2051 growth is really dependent on the inputs from the other background studies. So depending on the level of detail that's presented in winter, how much information we can have presented to council will drive how far the land needs assessment is specifically. We've also continued to receive settlement area boundary expansions. So we will need to first break that into two parts. First, understanding the amount of land required. And then second of all, understanding where requests have been received, but also study the surrounding areas of each settlement area boundary to understand, should an expansion be required, where the most appropriate location is. So I would say it's more unlikely that specific locations for expansion are recommended within the winter council reports. Rather, an understanding of how much land is required to accommodate the growth would be more likely.
Thanks, Greg. Next question we have here. Given how the focus is on creating complete communities, what is the region's plan on creating community benefit agreements with developers to ensure the communities where development happens receive the localized benefits they need specifically to their neighborhood? Does the region have an official community benefit agreement policy as a strategy to include inclusive growth? And I think maybe I'll direct this to Chris. Do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, I'm not quite sure what to respond to this one here. I mean, the community benefit issue is new, and it's the replacement of the DC side of things. But yeah, I'm probably not going to want to provide something that's, I haven't got the background on this particular item. So I'm sorry, Emily, if anybody else wants to jump in on this one.
I think we'll connect with some internal departments. I think the question might relate to community benefits under the DC bylaw. So what we'll do is discuss that with some other departments and people involved in that, and we'll send an answer to you.
Thanks, Emily.
Thank you. Then we'll do one more Q&A question and then again move over to our raised hands. So the question we have here is, with regards to the housing growth needs versus employment land growth requirements, has it been taken into consideration that many residents coming to Niagara are retirees? And I think they are, so maybe Greg can speak to this.
Yeah, Stacy, thank you for the question. Within the provincial forecasts, as we mentioned, essentially Niagara is expecting a population increase of about 215,000 people to the year 2051 and only 81,000 jobs. That's about a ratio of 2.5 people to every job. That relates directly to the fact that Niagara has the third oldest average age within CMAs across Ontario and across Canada. Niagara is an aging municipality. Our population growth is driven mainly by people coming from other places in Ontario that are already over the average age of a Niagara resident, which will further compound the pace of aging within Niagara. And this is specifically addressed within the provincial forecast there's a technical background that comes with that. So employment forecasts can be broken down into 4 categories. The 4 categories being major office growth, population-related employment growth, employment land employment growth, and rural-based employment growth. In Niagara, the most significant driver of employment growth will be population-related employment. So those are the types of jobs that are more serving of the community. They will include doctors in long-term care home. They will include grocery stores and anything else you'd kind of find in a community that isn't an industrial or within an agricultural zone. So I guess in summation, yes, certainly Niagara is aware of the demographic that we have. We're aware of the demographic that is forthcoming, and the employment that we are forecasting is in line with that.
Okay, thank you, Greg. With that, I'm going to move over. We have a couple of raised hands here. So I'm going to start with Bob B. So Bob, I'm going to allow you to talk. And again, please unmute your mic on your end.
Yeah, I just had a general question. That would be, are these webinars, can we view them in the future? I missed the one last night and I really wanted to see it, but unfortunately I couldn't do so. I'm just wondering if this particular webinar and previous ones that we've already seen in the last week or so, can they be viewed in the future?
Yes, so we are recording these sessions tonight, and the intent is to post them on our official plan website within the coming days. So you will be able to view them retroactively.
And what website, what website would I find that on?
I will get you the actual web page address, so we can maybe follow up with that.
Okay.
Unless you have it offhand, Dave.
They'll be able to access it via going to the main web page for the new official plan.
I think that's what,
Yeah.
yeah. So we will follow up with the address.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. And then lastly, I have George T, who has his hand raised. George, I'm going to allow you to talk. And again, please unmute your mic on your end. Hi, George. It looks like you have unmuted your mic. Not sure if there's some technical difficulties there. We can give you another minute. Hi, George. Unfortunately, we're not able to hear you. So I'm going to lower your hand for now. Please feel free to submit a written comment through the Q&A, or if you're able to kind of troubleshoot on your end, we can try it again. Thank you. So with that, we have a couple of questions here in the Q&A. I suppose we can start with the first one here. So I believe these are referring to the natural environment mapping. So the question is, with 3 different mapping proposals, what would be the change in settlement areas and numbers between all 3 mapping proposals? And when will we see full and concise mapping instead of what has been proposed? So I'm not sure if you have any insight on that, Greg. Again, I think this might be referring to some of the natural environment work that is being done and was overviewed at our webinars last week.
Yeah, I'll defer to Dave.
Yeah, I believe the question refers to the natural heritage and water systems options that are out for consultation. Obviously, there's different options that affect natural heritage features or the systems within the urban area and the amount of land, which could differ from system option to system option. We don't have the the information of how much land that affects right now because the mapping isn't done. The approach taken to date is to get direction on an option and then map that option because there's a significant amount of work that has to go into mapping the option. So we want to get some direction before we proceed to do that significant amount of work. We do realize that mapping is an issue and people wanting to see the mapping and how much land the mapping affects in those system options. So we're having internal discussions about how quickly we can bring the mapping forward, given getting direction on an option, et cetera. So we do realize it's an issue and we're trying to address it to the best of our ability. But the approach right now is to get direction on an option because of the significant amount of work in mapping that.
Thank you, Dave. And in our next question, we do have a related, I suppose, policy or environmental policy perspective here. So I'm curious about how the environmental policy review will inform the urban land needs study specifically. Can you provide more information on how the impacts of the proposed policy framework and policies will be quantified? So Greg, I'm not sure if you could provide any perspective there.
Similar to what?
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm not sure if
It is.
added.
I'll just add, Matt, thank you for the question. As mentioned, within the land needs assessment, there's essentially a takeout for environmental features, depending on which environmental option is selected, and the level of protection would ultimately mean it would directly relate to how much land cannot be developed for urban purposes. So the higher the environmental protection, that would result in more takeouts from a land needs perspective. That's within the existing urban areas. I would also add that with the 2017 coordinated plan review from the province, the introduction of the natural heritage system for the Greenbelt plan ultimately created what is currently an overlay outside of urban area boundaries. So the system, the natural heritage system that currently exists, as I mentioned, is an overlay, but should an urban boundary or rural settlement, any settlement area, be it rural or urban, be expanded to include the natural heritage system, that overlay becomes a designation and that would be protected. So should a boundary expand to include a portion of the natural heritage system, that would not be developable land. Instead, it would be the lands around that would come in for an urban or hamlet type development.
Thank you, Greg. And then our next question we have here. Sorry, I'll read it out. As planners determine the vacant land inventory parcels within their own municipalities, and that information is provided to the region to assist in developing, allocating targets and density of those parcels, what role does the council of the municipality have in the process, and can a council request reconsideration of the allocations given to it? As the allocation to the municipalities are minimum targets, does a municipality have an ability to slow or stop development if targets are achieved earlier than 2051? And as required in Amendment 1 of the Growth Plan, how are the market forces now a requirement in determining land needs methodology and allocations within municipalities? And I believe Isaiah will be speaking to this question.
Thank you, Alex, and thank you for the question, Councillor Bothwell. There's three parts to this. I'm going to start with the second part of the question about minimum targets and municipalities' ability to slow or stop development. In the new growth plan, the province has made it explicitly clear that these are minimum targets, that we plan for them, that our infrastructure, our policies are to plan for that amount of growth. It's also something that gets revisited as well. So, we're setting a population target to 2051, and we're going to be revisiting that at the times that we review our official plans. There's no premise to slow or stop development, or really meeting those targets is doesn't trigger anything, doesn't start something or allow a municipality to take those kinds of positions. So I'm not sure that that's really how things have played out or how we see it going as well. The market forces part of your question is an interesting one as well. This is something that's new in the growth plan. We're required to do a market demand analysis, and all of us are kind of figuring out what exactly that means and how to roll that into our program. And that's something that we're doing now. But it's been made clear also by the provincial policy that we have to plan for market demand. So we have to be ready for the demands of the market. We can't avoid that. We have to provide market demand housing. And we know from the presentation today as well that affordability is a major issue and going to be a growing issue within the region unless we increase the amount of housing required, in particular higher density forms of housing as well. So we're doing that work now, and we'll see what the outcome is. The third part of your question is about the reconsideration by local councils of the allocation. And we're working very closely with municipal staff. It's an iterative process. Greg described it in response to a couple questions and in the presentation as well. This is something that we're not just developing independently. This is something that we're working very hard on as experts at the region, with other departments within the region, with all the local staff through meetings over many, many, many years. So we think there's going to be a very good product here, and we're certainly going to be sharing that with local councils as well. So I hope you found that helpful, and would be happy to answer any other questions offline as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Isaiah. Next question we have here, and then we'll go over to some of our raised hands. So at the Natural Heritage Session, there were a number of identified areas where urban boundary expansions are taking place. One was Smithville, which I noted could result in negative environmental impacts because of the presence of karst formations. There are at least two other urban expansions which were identified. Two of these were in Western Niagara Falls. Could all the areas where these expansions are being considered be mapped and be clearly identified tonight? Could it be clearly identified how people can be involved in what I believe from the previous meeting were the watershed planning exercises which are guiding these exercises?
So I'll take the first crack at that. So thank you, John, again for the question. I think the first component of my response will be just a piece of clarification. Right now, there are no urban boundary expansions that are taking place. Rather, I believe that the map that you're referring to within the watershed planning are areas of potential growth. So these are areas that we have received urban boundary expansions for and have provided to the watershed planning team for evaluation. As I really hope we highlighted this through the presentation, this is a very iterative process. Ultimately, we are doing our best to balance the demands of growth and use the strategies that are associated with the regional official plan to assess the requests that have come in. So we're using the watershed planning strategy as the growth plan directs us to. We're going to use that to evaluate potential areas of expansion to understand what the exact environmental impacts will be. And I believe that's the area that was identified in that schedule and that presentation. Certainly to this point, there are no specific locations that are being recommended for expansion. As I said, everything is being studied and everything is iterative. So where we're at with the various strategies associated with the official plan is still somewhat the background stage review and reviewing options. As our reviews and specific recommendations come to fruition, you will certainly have every opportunity to comment on that. We'll be back with another round of public information centers in the new year. And in that round, I believe you'll start to see more specifics, be they policy, or specific locations that are being contemplated for expansion and the like.
Thank you, Greg. So I think we'll have one more from the Q&A box here. So the question is, what is the region's community engagement strategy in hearing resident voices from equity-seeking communities, including BIPOC, persons without homes, et cetera? And I think, Dave, you might be able to speak to this a bit.
Sure, thank you. We're trying to engage with the public as much as possible and stakeholder groups. That said, one of the larger policy issues we have to address from a housing perspective is affordable housing. And in doing that, provincial policy requires our affordable housing policies to align with the Housing and Homelessness Action Plan. So that plan, the consultation involved in developing the Housing and Homelessness Action Plan was significant, and there was a lot of outreach to consult with the agencies that represent the types of communities that you've mentioned. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. With that, I think we'll go over to the raised hand. We have Greg M, who is looking to ask a question. So Greg, I'm going to allow you to speak, and then again, please make sure to unmute your mic on your end. So hi, Greg, just a reminder.
Yep. Can you guys hear me?
We can.
You're good.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for taking my question. I appreciate it. I live in Grimsby, and one of the concerns that I have, and it's not a short-term concern, but a concern that's existed for over 10 years now, was the implementation of the Greenbelt and how it was implemented, and how areas are identified in the region with respect to, in particular, agricultural land and its value. When the Greenbelt was implemented and we went to all these open houses to discuss how it was going to be implemented, it would seem the province government at the day wasn't interested in understanding that certain areas were more valuable agriculturally and from an environmental perspective than others. And they put a blanket approach to classifying these lands. And they depended in large part on old data. In particular, I own a number of properties that are classified as unique agricultural land by the region. However, most of us that live up here in the area that I live in, we identify it as useless, hard as rock clay. Now, I was wondering whether the region was interested or was planning on perhaps working with the province to perhaps lighten up the restrictions that exist within the Greenbelt plan, such that perhaps exemptions could be perhaps supported down the road. Because as it stands right now, over the last decade, I've spent over $100,000 trying to plant product and try to live within the confines of this Greenbelt to no avail. And nobody's benefiting from this. The region's not collecting taxes, and moving forward, actually, we're going to be shutting down all our farm operations. My sharecroppers are no longer going to be renting my property because it's too expensive and the yields are too low. There are going to be no taxes collected at the municipal, regional level. These are going to turn into fields of weeds. And I was just kind of curious what your take was on that, and whether anything, any consideration to that type of situation was on your desk.
Thank you for the question, Greg. I think Dave will actually speak to this one.
Sure, thank you for the question. It's an important one and a good one. As we started out this exercise, I think it was 2017, the province undertook a consolidated provincial plan review. And of course, the mapping in the Greenbelt plan was the subject to a lot of scrutiny and concerns from various property owners and from various municipalities. We consolidated a lot of requested mapping changes that were sent to the provincial government, and that was the former provincial government. There were no changes made to take any land out of the Greenbelt plan. With the change in government, all those changes were again sent to the province. We're not expecting any mapping changes through the exercise. And as you're probably aware, we have to conform to the Greenbelt Plan. As part of the agricultural policies, we are attempting to create some guidance material that would help with future decisions on mapping in the Greenbelt Plan in terms of changes in working with the province. So that's ongoing. And we've also had some properties come up through more site-specific planning studies that we've talked to the province about changing, et cetera. So that work continues on. For the current time period, we're going to have to conform to the Greenbelt Plan as it stands.
Do I have an opportunity to counter?
You can ask another question related to that.
I'd like, yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So it almost sounds like you guys are laying down then, because at the end of the day, you know, we're all stakeholders in the economic viability of our rural area here. And I don't understand why the region couldn't take the approach that, hey, listen, we have this pocket of land that's virtually useless. It's not making us any money, agriculturally or otherwise. Yet we have this area here that is outside of this green belt, this imposed green belt by the province, and it is economically, agriculturally viable. Why can we not provide or work towards an exemption process? And this has got to start with the region. The province isn't going to offer this up. This is why you guys are having these types of meetings. This has got to start from the region. It's got to start from the municipality as well. You know, put together an exemption process that allows people to prove that their property is agriculturally unviable and say, hey, listen, well, why don't we develop that then? And then we can take these lands here that are agriculturally viable and add them to the green belt so that there's a net loss of zero of lands. But it doesn't sound like you guys have even considered that. And and how long has this Greenbelt Plan existed for? A long time. And I'm sure I'm not the first person that's actually brought this up. You know, that you guys have a bunch of useless land in this Greenbelt, and if the Niagara region isn't going to stand up for its citizens in terms of representing their interests, their best interests, then who is?
I appreciate the comment and the question. I wouldn't say we're laying down on the issue. There's been, like I mentioned, several spots that we're quite concerned about the mapping. And as I mentioned, we're, as part of the agricultural work, trying to develop some guidance material for future changes. How we report on them when we bring all this forward to point out to council the concerns. By law, we're required to conform. Decisions under the Planning Act have to conform. But that's not to say that we're not discussing with the province the concerns about the mapping, et cetera, to lay the foundation to hopefully get changes created at some point where they're warranted and make sense.
So thank you, Greg. We are going to move on to another question for now. So with that, we'll move over to our first question here. When is the urban boundary line going to be finalized? And I think, Greg, you can probably answer this.
Yeah, so as mentioned, getting to the point of making any recommendations on settlement area boundaries will be one of the last components of the regional official plan process. It will require all the subsequent studies to be done, all those inputs that come from those strategies to be complete, and provide a land needs assessment so that we can then complete the land needs to understand the land that's required within each municipality, to then assess the opportunities and limitations for any settlement area boundary expansion. So that would be one of the last components of the official plan review.
Thank you, Greg. And our next question is a follow-up to an earlier question regarding urban expansions. So does the region not have the authority to defer all urban expansion considerations to a date after the finalization of the official plan? I believe it should have this authority and as such not permit any expansions before that date. And Isaiah, I believe you'll speak to this one.
Thank you, Alex, and thank you for the question. There is this new policy that's in the growth plan. It's new. It talks about the 40 hectare expansion outside of an MCR, outside of the official plan. It's in order to exercise this, it is quite exceptional. There are a number of steps to get an expansion that's not through our official plan. It's a quite complex process as we see it. What's very interesting about the Northwest expansion in Welland specifically is that they've completed a significant amount of work that was intended to go in our official plan. They did a tremendous amount of background work already, and instead of proceeding in our official plan, they've proposed to proceed in advance of the official plan as an urban expansion before we're done our official plan. But they've done the work effectively of an official plan in order to put that together. So they're in a special circumstance that's different from others. And just by really a set of coincidence that Welland put themselves into this position with this type of application for an expansion. So I think your question is a good one in that it is unusual what's happening with that application. And generally speaking, 40 hectare expansions, are not something that we anticipate a lot of, but it is something that's permitted under the provincial policy. So I hope that helps, and thank you.
Thank you, Isaiah. Next question we have here. Even though the province is predicting our growth related to an aging population, is there any thought, activity, strategy to adjust this prediction to have a more complete community that includes the younger demographic? And I believe either Greg, maybe Chris can speak to this one.
Sure, I can start off, and then Chris, if you want to add anything. I mentioned that Niagara's population growth is driven mainly by intra-provincial migration, being people moving to Niagara from elsewhere in Ontario. That is half of the picture. The other half of the picture is that basically the other component of Niagara's population growth is net non-permanent migrants that are here in Niagara, essentially for schooling. So there is basically two different demographics that are driving population growth in Niagara. There are, as I mentioned, people coming in from other places in Ontario that tend to be over the age of 45. And then there's also essentially students that are coming here for our post-secondary institutions that are between the ages of 19 and 25. And they are here presumably temporarily, but Niagara is our perspective that we want to give them every opportunity from an economic, a housing, a community perspective to stay. We want that younger demographic to be a major contributing component of population growth in Niagara. So certainly when we talk about complete communities, I think it best directly relates to housing affordability. It best relates to diversifying the housing mix in Niagara to give residents that are here, be they permanent or temporary, an option for housing and an opportunity to stay in Niagara longer than what they maybe first came here to do.
I would just simply add that, the older demographic or the senior demographic and the younger demographic are often looking for the same types of housing. So, the supply of the housing, perhaps in the apartment fashion, whether it be rental or condominium or what have you, that form of, a dwelling unit in a complete community is certainly something that's can go either way to provide living arrangements for both ends of that spectrum. So it's complementary, I believe, in that respect. So hopefully that's an added benefit to a complete community. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. And I think we might get to George. George, who tried to raise his hand and was unable to connect with us. So I think there might be a couple of parts to his question here. So I'll try to paraphrase a little bit. The question is, how will the Niagara region expect to reach the goals outlined by the province? And how well will the Niagara region meet these goals? I think the concern being that some of these development applications may not be able to get through. So I don't know if we have any general comments to respond to that.
Well, I think we have to plan for our growth. We have to allocate the growth to the local municipalities. That's done in consultation with the local planning departments, et cetera. And they have to realize that that growth has to be accommodated somewhere within their municipalities. As part of the regional structure, we have some strategic growth areas where we want to direct more intensification towards, but the rest of the general allocated growth, municipalities have to plan for that, accommodating that growth. And that's why we're encouraging the use of secondary community planning, where that growth can be planned for in a comprehensive manner involving a lot of consultation.
Great. And actually, I see that George has raised his hand again. I'm not sure if this is a follow-up question. So George, I will unmute you. We'll try to see if we can get you to connect. So hi, George. So unfortunately, George, it doesn't look like we're able to hear you. So again, if you do have a follow-up question, please put it within the comment box and we will try to respond to it this evening. And if not, like we had mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, we will be responding to any additional questions via text on the website. So thank you. So then we can return to the Q&A questions here. The question that I have centers around infrastructure. So specifically, the question is, the main water supply pipe is on Vansicle Road, and the Niagara Health St. Catharines Centre has been built for many years. Is any growth plan around the west end of St. Catharines around the hospital? And this might be an infrastructure question. We have a separate webinar in a couple of weeks, but does anybody at the table here have any comments to this?
Outside of being hemmed in by the Greenbelt plan, it's difficult to say that there would be anything occurring at that west end. I mean, Greenbelt plan, when it's up for review, that's when the boundaries enter the equation for discussion.
Yeah, I would add that there's a lot of employment lands out at the west end of St. Catharines, and they're doing their own, St. Catharines is doing their own review of employment lands, which will factor into things.
And I would just add that generally speaking, infrastructure is one of the many pieces that we consider when allocating growth. As we've mentioned here, St. Catharines is really driven by their current lands that are designated. The Greenbelt basically prevents any opportunities for expansions there, and therefore the infrastructure that exists will be relied upon for mainly the type of growth that is intensification focused. And that's a consideration of St. Catharines and likewise across many municipalities of Niagara.
Thank you, Paul. We can move on to our next question here. And in the interest of time, it's a little bit lengthy, so I'll paraphrase a little bit. The question centers around Niagara-on-the-Lake specifically. It's given a target of a 15% intensification in the current regional official plan. However, they're seeing increased development in the minimum number of units that are being approved by council. So their question is, how do we protect our built and natural areas from these types of development as required under the Heritage Act and through provincial and regional and local environmental policies? So Perhaps Chris, do you want to speak to this one initially?
I'm not sure I can enter in the discussion here. I just wanted to say that the 15% intensification rate, I'm just trying to read this again, sorry. As you know, the Virgil, the Old Town, urban areas in Niagara and the Lake, any greenfield that may be remaining is built out. The focus of growth is really going to be shifting over towards the Glendale area. So, you know, I'm not quite sure what more to offer in that respect, other than that, with all of that being mostly greenfield in that area, that the intensification rate is in realistic terms, it's going to calculate low, you know, once that is taking off. So I'm not sure if anybody else wants to focus in on that. Whether, you know, she's intending that that's some sort of threat to the heritage.
Yep, so I can give it a second if any other panelists want to speak to this question.
Thank you. I can add a little bit to this question as well. First, speaking about the intensification rate, yeah, it's correct. There is a target, an existing target of 15% in Niagara-on-the-Lake. The intensification rate region-wide is higher than the last iteration. We're now required to plan at 50% region-wide. So a lot of municipalities are going to experience higher intensification rates. We haven't set intensification rates quite yet. We're in discussions on what to do with that, as we had mentioned. But the expectation is there's going to be more intensification than under the last period. I mean, either you get more intensification or you get more greenfield, you get more growth outside of, you get more greenfield growth. So, you know, there's a shift happening where we want to see higher rates of intensification as a general comment, you know, without getting into Niagara-on-the-Lake specifically. So I wanted to point that out. And relating to that, you know, the growth that we're experiencing now in Niagara is much greater than it used to be. Things have really picked up. You know, we're looking at a 1 to 2% annual growth nowadays, and we're expecting that to continue. You know, we're not going to have the time of the the early 2000s where there wasn't much happening in Niagara. Growth is picking up, and we're going to have to be proactive to manage that. And in Niagara-on-the-Lake's case, as Chris mentioned, you know, the growth is going to be predominantly directed to Glendale. It's the region's role to plan for that. We've done a terrific job in careful consultation with the community on the Glendale District Plan. And that work is going to continue through the secondary plan working. And the idea is that that will be a focused area of growth. That will be a complete community that will have amenities that will be able to absorb an amount of growth that's coming to Niagara. And we're going to be proactive in planning that. We're going to be very carefully addressing you know, the regional requirements, Heritage Act requirements, natural heritage policies. There's going to be very careful study of that as part of the secondary plan as well. So that's what we do. We do things in a proactive way so that we can manage this growth, so that we can be prepared for it. The last thing we want to do is not be proactive and not be prepared. So thank you for your question, and I hope that helped.
Thank you, Isaiah. So the next question we have has to do with brownfield contamination. So could strategies be developed to address these problems, including financial assistance from senior levels of government? In the past, there was no serious effort to estimate brownfield capacity. While the 30-year planning effort normally encourages sprawl, if it is assumed that sometime in this period brownfields will be cleaned up, it would encourage better planning. And I don't know if Isaiah, you would like to speak to this one, or if any of the other panelists have any comments.
I can take the first crack at that. So John, thank you again for the question. So brownfields typically occur and are existing within our built up areas. That's essentially the geography that the province has defined as the location where intensification occurs. And brownfields are certainly a focus to help us achieve our region-wide 50% intensification rate. You mentioned here, no serious effort has been made to estimate brownfield capacity in the past. Certainly that is a consideration of our new land needs assessment. It is a strong component of the new provincial methodology. We need to take into consideration opportunities within the built up area for development, and brownfields tend to be amongst the largest ones in terms of capacity for future growth. The main limitation of brownfields being historically they tend to be of an employment land. So there may be situations where brownfields are within employment areas. Employment areas are protected for employment uses specifically. If we want to redevelop, or if it's financially more viable to redevelop a brownfield for a residential or a mixed use opportunity, that tends to require additional levels of studies that would be either employment area or employment land conversions or land use changes, and all of which are being contemplated right now through the regional official plan. So again, I guess in summation, brownfields are key. They're very important to the future of Niagara, and the redevelopment of them for be it employment or residential use is important, especially to make use of infrastructure that currently exists in and around them. As I mentioned, they tend to be in more urban developed areas and are prime opportunities for redevelopment.
Thank you, Greg.
You're welcome, Alex.
So our next question, actually, I'll respond to this. So the question is, how will you and do you define affordable with regards to housing? It is a relative term. So how do you plan to define and redefine as you move through the years and across the various municipalities? So it's a great question, Carolyn. So to clarify, how we think of affordable housing versus how it's defined in the growth plan and the provincial policy statement can be a little disparate. So the way we define growth, affordability in the growth plan and the provincial policy statement is any housing that for our lower and moderate income households will be able to apply a 30% of their annual income on shelter costs. So that is to say that for any household in Niagara that is making under $85,000 or so a year, which is our kind of upper range of our lower and moderate income households, they need to be spending less than 30% of their gross annual income on things like mortgage, rent, property taxes, and utility costs that all go into the cost of accommodations. So that definition will remain static, at least over the course of our next 10 years until our next official plan review. And so what we are doing and what we have started through our kind of affordable housing analysis last year was to start to collect information through census data, through CMHC, and through other sources of information so that we are able to keep track and understand what that range for low and moderate income households will be. And that's how that's going to be applied through the official plan versus something like the Housing and Homelessness Action Plan, which might look at affordable housing as government assisted or government managed housing. So I hope that helps a little bit in deciding kind of the difference in how that's applied in the land use sphere versus in kind of the more nomenclature understanding. And then I think we only have a couple of questions left. So I'm not sure who would like to speak to this next question, but I think this is a follow-up to our discussion on kind of bringing a younger generation into our complete communities. So if there are any other further thoughts on this matter, essentially, what are we doing to keep these younger people here, housing, and what about job strategy?
Sure. I'll start and answer, and anybody can jump in to supplement it if they feel. As you know, the official plan is a land use planning document. So first and foremost, we want to make sure we're providing for enough employment areas and employment lands to allow for businesses and jobs to come into the area so that the land supply and the designated land, et cetera, is there to help attract business and development for jobs. And then as far as accommodating for young people as well from a housing perspective, I think Chris talked about the importance of age in place, and it's not just planning for the elderly or the older age bracket, but also the younger age bracket and keeping our young people here. And that's providing a range of housing types and the flexibility for the young people to have choice, a greater housing supply to try and make housing more affordable as well. And then complete communities where housing and jobs are located within proximity to minimize costs of traveling from one to the other, et cetera. So those are some of the planning approaches to help with that situation.
I would just add on there that, as far as the employment goes, Stephen, you would probably want to key in on tomorrow evening's presentation. The employment piece is there. As you saw at the outset here, it's certainly something we're considering at the competitive region, how to maintain and be competitive to attract the employers for the broad range of our youth, so whether it's manufacturing right through to the tech. So I think that there'll be some things there tomorrow that would be of interest to you in terms of classification. So, I would encourage that. I mean, it's probably well worth your while. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And I'm going to introduce Doug Giles, who has joined us as a panelist here. Doug is the Director of Community and Long Range Planning. And I believe he would like to kind of contribute to this conversation.
Yeah, thank you, Alex. I've been listening in. There's been a lot of questions on this tonight about, the age of our population, and that's projected to grow. I would like to point people to work that we did on affordable housing last year, and it's public information. There were 2 reports that we presented to council. What those reports did was for the first part, as Alex has pointed out, we clearly defined what affordable housing was, which was 30% of a household's income to be spent on housing. That gave us some very interesting numbers, but it also pointed us towards the challenge that not providing affordable housing is going to provide. And what that told us in a lot of discussions that we had too, was that affordable housing is required for all ages of the housing market. One of the things that it raised is we looked at the industry types that were predominant across the Niagara region, and affordable housing is one of the key things to keep a lot of industry sectors with employees over the long term in Niagara. And the reason is because as these industries grow in Niagara, it's generally younger people that will fill those positions. Right now, I think Greg presented a chart at the beginning that showed right now we have a predominance of single detached residential housing. We still need to provide that, but we really need to increase the amount of medium and high density housing in the future, and in particular rental housing, because people who are going to who want to come and work in our industries in Niagara may not have lived here before, and they don't want to come in and buy a house at $400,000 or $500,000 or whatever the price might be in the future, just to try Niagara out and see if they want to live here. A lot of young people are pretty mobile. They like to move around. They might only want to come here for 2 or 3 years. So we really need the different types of housing mix in order to encourage younger people who are going to fill the future jobs as these industries grow in Niagara. And I would encourage you to go to the official plan website. I think that's where the affordable housing reports are. And if you look at both of them, they really have a lot of detailed information. There's also a piece in there that's very interesting that talks about the types of occupations that we might not be able to attract if we don't have various types of housing that are more affordable. So they are very interesting pieces of research that have really directed a lot of our thinking. So I would encourage you to go and have a look at those.
Thank you, Doug. And as Doug had mentioned, those are available on the official plan website and under the growth management webpage particularly. So it is 7:46, so we do have a couple of questions left. And like I said, we'll try to answer some of the remaining questions, but any additional we may have to respond to on our website. So I will start with George, and yes, he is sorry he can't voice talk in. But I think his question persists. He would like to know how the region of Niagara will allow building that is necessary to meet provincial goals. We have to build. So is there any maybe comments on how we can work with our municipalities and with the industry to get some of this development realized or implemented? I know that one of the ways in which we mentioned in our presentation, secondary plans and district plans are a particularly good tool to really engage the community and get them on the ground and to understand what's within that space, what that land use analysis needs to be, and really start to determine what that form and scale of development should take place. So certainly that's one of the implementation tools we're looking to emphasize in the new official plan. I don't know if there's any additional comments on this matter, though.
Yeah, in addition to what Alex said, certainly we have to conform to what the growth plan projects, and now provincial forecasts are considered minimums. We ultimately rely upon the information within each of these individual strategies, as I mentioned. You know, the housing opportunities, the intensification opportunities, a review of land supply needs, and that'll help us drive allocations. The other consideration of this is that, and we've talked about this a few times in different ways, is that Niagara has been an aging demographic. And ultimately, the population that exists today will be very different than the population that exists in 2051. And Niagara has a natural growth rate in the negatives. As in, there are more deaths than births in Niagara, and we're driven by migration. So we need to set the framework in place that allows for Niagara's communities to continue to survive, to not create inefficiencies in the tax base that currently exists, and ultimately housing will be needed to accommodate existing populations and new populations that are coming in to fill homes that will eventually be vacated in some way or another. So certainly it is necessary that we plan for this and that we use the provincial forecast as it should be as a minimum to plan for future growth in Niagara.
And yeah, thank you, Greg. It's Doug Giles again. Just to add to that, I think Isaiah's comment before that indicated what our growth rate is at right now. I think over the past 3 years, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Greg, because you have these numbers in your head a bit more than I do, but I think it's basically over the past 3 years, we've been growing at a rate of about 1.8%. So, you know, that is growth that is coming. So we do have to accommodate it. Now, this growth hasn't occurred down here like that for quite some time. For a long time, the growth coming out of Toronto headed west out towards Waterloo and headed east up towards Oshawa, and along those within those areas, we can see good things that were done and not so good things that were done. We know right now that planning, that managing growth and planning for it achieves a lot better results than not doing it. So that's, I think, what we're trying to present tonight is a bit of a comprehensive. Hopefully, people are understanding that this is a very dynamic and comprehensive research and work that we're doing to identify how to best manage this. Our approach is, yes, we do need some detached residential, that's no doubt, but we also need a lot more medium to higher density housing in existing areas. And that's sort of evident when we're doing the Glendale District Plan, the secondary plans with the local municipalities around the GO station, the Brock District Plan. All of those are saying, okay, here's areas where we want growth to happen, and how can we best manage that so we can accommodate what we can in those areas, preserve the more established residential areas, and make better use of existing facilities. So it's a really big balancing act to try to do that, but the message is growth is coming. We cannot stop that. It's been proven in a number of areas around the world that if you don't manage it, it's going to be the impacts are not going to be what the community wants. So we realize that we have to figure out a way to do this because it is at our doorstep right now.
Thank you, Doug. And with that, I think we have one more question we can get to tonight. And I can go ahead and I'll start by answering this because I'm afraid I might have caused more confusion than I did clarify things with my last response. So the question is, can you explain the difference between housing affordability and affordable housing? One is subsidized and one isn't. So I guess I'll preface this by saying we can think of housing and housing providers along a housing continuum. So on the one hand, we have homelessness services, we have transitional housing, we have supportive housing, government assisted programs like rent supplements, government managed housing. So Niagara Regional Housing, for instance, is one of our housing managers. And then we have market rent and then market ownership. So when we talk about affordable housing, it can also be referred to as community housing or government housing. And that tends to fall under the kind of lower end of the spectrum there. And those programs are typically or addressed by a housing action plan by a municipality. So here at the Niagara region, we recently updated our housing and homelessness action plan, and those provide specific target items and metrics in order to measure success in addressing things on kind of the affordable housing end of things. Now, the official plan broadly speaks to housing in the market rent and market ownership end of things, because the focus really is to provide a sufficient supply that will meet our future population demands. And so the definition for housing affordability, that 30% of gross annual income spent on shelter costs, that's kind of where the official plan takes its cue. And there's the difference between some of those two terms. So I hope that clarified things.
And Alex, I'm going to jump in again and just provide a little bit more context too. Is that, again, I referred to the work that we did on affordable housing. I encourage you to go into that. What that does is that work was done to inform the official plan and the housing homelessness and action plan. And what it does is you will see the different income categories that are broken down. And I think what we did is we gave all of that information to each of the municipalities. I know Fort Erie took that information and went one step further than we could and actually sort of looked at the submarkets of affordable housing within their municipality, because one thing we really we're trying to do, and we're continuing to do too, is affordable housing. There's a lot of categories within the general term affordable housing. And one of the things we were looking at doing is saying, if looking at if you provide, and we were working with Niagara Regional Housing and a few others on this, if you provide a level focus on a particular market within the affordable housing spectrum, will that move people from one level of affordable housing up into another and open up housing that wouldn't otherwise be available? So like, for instance, there are people living in housing, they could afford to pay more, but there isn't anything available for them in the market to move to. Therefore, they stay in housing that is cheaper than what they can afford. So if we can get, like, sort of move people from one type of housing to another, what would the impact be on that opening up affordable housing for other people? So it's a very dynamic process. There's a lot of complexity to it. But what we did was we put that information together so we could get it out there and make it available so that people can look at this big conundrum that we face and try to work with the same base of data, so that when people are attempting to come up with solutions with this, we're all sort of working from the same piece of information. So again, I'd encourage people to go and look at that data and have a look at it, use it, ask questions about it, and you know, work with us on figuring out. But by no means is it an easy thing to identify, but at least we've started by sort of identifying what the challenge is. And there's a long way to go from here to work out a solution.
Thank you, Doug. And I know we're right at 8 o'clock here, so I'm not sure if we'll be able to answer some of the remaining questions, but we do have one more, perhaps as a follow-up. So I think this will be our last for the evening, and then we will wrap up this session. So the question is, how will the region work with developers and builders to achieve housing affordability and remove roadblocks and delays that add to the cost of housing? More affordability equals less affordable housing. So that's a good question, Chuck. I think, like Doug had mentioned, it's kind of a multifaceted issue. There's no one solution that will really make sure that we're providing more affordable housing. What we can do within the realms of the official plan is ensure that we're providing a sufficient supply to bridge the gap between what we know our demand to be, providing a kind of a mix of housing types in order to provide options for buyers in order to have different kind of size and types of dwellings that might fit their price points. And the way that we can do that through land use planning is by encouraging local municipalities to improve the flexibility within their zoning bylaws. We can look at different kinds of incentives, and we're currently going through our own incentive review and seeing if there are any targeted programs that we can develop for affordable and rental housing specifically. So from the land use planning sphere, that's kind of what we're doing or looking to accomplish with the official plan itself.
Yeah, and I'll just throw my little bit in again, Alex. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you.
Yeah, one of the ways where, you know, this is a really good question, and it's one of the bigger challenges is how do you get more built? One of the things that we've done in the work is we've tried to identify the different affordable housing markets, because those markets really range in terms of income. You know, you have you know, the lowest of incomes, and they're the likes that Niagara Regional Housing work with. But at the other spectrum, you actually have people who would be considered to be in the middle income categories that are having affordability issues. Now, one of the things that we modeled in the work that we did too was we did different scenarios, and we looked at population growth, and basically without doing anything, what that model told us is if we don't meet our 2041 population targets, and this was the 2041 population targets, that the affordable housing problem is just going to get higher, because as less housing is on, as less people are coming into the area, and the housing isn't really being built because of the lower market demands. Basically, what happens is people that would not be in an affordable housing situation right now will get into an affordable housing situation in the future, simply because the lack of of housing being available and the prices escalating beyond what their household would be capable of paying. So again, there's really some interesting work. It is about trying to find how we can get more supply, but there's supply needed in quite a few different submarkets of housing. Some is in the lower income, some is up in the more middle income, which, you know, hopefully we can find ways where increasing like medium and higher density might accommodate that population, or, you know, different forms of housing might push people out of their existing housing that's maybe too big for them. Then it will open up other opportunities for people that need bigger housing. Like, it's very complex, but right now it's about identifying the different markets and then basically saying, okay, here's what we understand about the different markets. Who's really the people that are going to assist us with those different aspects of the market? And it's not just one group or one organization. It's a number of organizations and people that will need to assist to resolve this. But building more housing is one of the simplest answers that we can provide.
So with that, it looks like we've covered all of our questions and we've run out of time. So thank you so much, everybody. On behalf of the entire project team, I'd like to thank you all for taking the time to engage with us tonight. As I said before, we greatly value your input and feedback. So again, as a final reminder, we are recording the session tonight and are planning to post it to the website in the next several days. It will be posted alongside a copy of the presentation. So thank you all and enjoy the rest of your evening.